My name is Jake and I work as a mechanic in a small town in Oklahoma. I'd been married to Emily for 15 years. I thought I knew my wife inside and out, but it turned out I didn't know anything at all. It all started when Emily got a job at the local bank. Before that, she'd been a housewife raising our daughter Chloe. But when our child started school, my wife said she wanted to do something meaningful with her life. I supported her decision. Our family budget could use the extra income. The first few months went wonderfully. Emily blossomed, became more confident in herself. She told me about her colleagues, about how interesting it was to work with people. She especially often mentioned her boss Richard Clayton. According to her, he was a fair supervisor and an experienced banker. I didn't pay much attention to these stories. I was busy with my work at the auto shop, trying to expand the business. I'd come home tired in the evenings. Emily and I would talk about household matters, and we'd help Chloe with her homework. But gradually I began to notice small changes. Emily started staying late at work more often. She said there was a lot of paperwork at the bank and she needed to get everything done. When I offered to pick her up from work, she refused, saying that Richard gave her rides home anyway since he lived nearby. One evening I decided to surprise her. I drove to the bank early so we could go home together. But the security guard said Emily had already left an hour ago. When I asked my wife about it, she seemed confused, then said she had stopped by the supermarket and forgot to let me know. I didn't really think much of it at the time. People forget things, it's normal. But something told me that not everything was as simple as it seemed. A week later, I decided to pick Emily up from work again. This time I arrived later and saw her coming out of the bank with a man in an expensive suit. This must have been that same Richard. They were standing by his car, a black BMW, and discussing something animatedly. Then Richard put his hand on her shoulder and she didn't pull away. I didn't drive up to them but waited for them to leave. The BMW drove off in a different direction, not toward home. My heart started beating faster, but I tried to convince myself that they were just discussing work matters at a cafe. That night Emily came home at 10 o'clock. She said there had been problems with the cash register and they had to check everything. I said nothing, but I could feel something breaking inside me. Over the next few weeks I became more observant. I noticed that Emily had started hiding her phone when it rang. Before, she always answered calls in front of me, even if it was her friends. Now she would go to another room or say she'd call back later. Once, when Emily was in the shower, her phone rang. The name, RC Work, was glowing on the screen. I didn't answer, but I understood, this must be Richard Clayton. Why hide a boss's name in her contacts? I decided to check my suspicions. I asked my friend Carl, who worked as a taxi driver, to keep an eye on my wife. Carl had many acquaintances among drivers, and they could discreetly track where Emily went after work. What Carl told me a week later confirmed my worst fears. Emily regularly went not home, but to an expensive hotel on the outskirts of town. There she met with the man in the BMW. They spent hours there. I felt the ground disappearing from under my feet. 15 years of marriage, a shared child, shared dreams, all of it turned out to be an illusion. Emily was cheating on me and she had been doing it for more than just one day. But the worst was yet to come. I decided to find out more about this Richard Clayton. It turned out he wasn't just Emily's boss. He was married, had 2 children, and had a reputation as a family man in town. His wife Patricia was actively involved in charity work, and they were often featured in local news as an exemplary family. You see, if Richard had been single, that would have been one thing. But he was destroying not only my family but his own as well. And Emily knew about it. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I decided to talk to my wife directly. But when I was choosing my words, I suddenly realized, what if I was wrong? What if everything wasn't as it seemed? Then I came up with a plan. I told Emily that I urgently needed to go to Tulsa on business. A client there wanted to buy a rare auto part. The trip was supposed to take 2 days. Emily didn't object, she even seemed pleased. Actually, I stopped at a motel 30 miles from home and started watching my wife. The first day nothing special happened. But on the second day, when I was sitting in my car across from the bank, I saw the familiar picture. Emily came out with Richard and they drove to that same hotel. I followed them but didn't go inside. Instead, I took several photos of their cars near the hotel and went home. Various thoughts were spinning in my head, from rage to despair. When Emily came home that evening, I greeted her as usual. I asked how her day went. She answered that everything was routine, nothing special. She was lying straight to my face and that hurt the most. The next day I returned from Tulsa. Emily greeted me joyfully, asking about the trip. I told her made-up details and watched her. She seemed absolutely calm, as if nothing had happened. Then I realized, This wasn't an accidental mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. Emily was leading a double life and doing it masterfully. How many more times had she deceived me? I started analyzing our life together over the past months. I remembered business trips to the neighboring city, professional development courses on weekends, corporate parties from which she returned too late. Everything was fitting into a clear picture. The most frightening thing was realizing that I was living with a stranger. The woman I had loved for 15 years turned out to be completely different. She could look me in the eyes and lie, she could hug me while thinking about another man. And then there was Chloe, our 12-year-old daughter who adored her mother. How do you explain to her what would happen next? How do you preserve her world when your own has fallen apart? For several days I couldn't figure out what to do next. Confrontation with Emily? A conversation with Richard? A lawyer? Every option seemed wrong. But then something happened that finally decided everything. Emily said that the bank was planning a reorganization, and she would need to work more. Maybe even travel on business trips to Oklahoma City. This meant even more opportunities to meet with Richard. Then I understood she wasn't planning to stop. On the contrary, their relationship was becoming more serious. And I was supposed to sit there and pretend I didn't know anything? That day I made my decision. I wouldn't stage scandals and confrontations. I would just leave. But I would do it in such a way that Emily would understand I knew everything. However, before making my final move, I wanted to be absolutely certain. I decided to gather more concrete evidence. Over the next 2 weeks, I became like a detective in my own life. I started paying attention to every detail, every inconsistency in Emily's stories. I noticed she had bought new lingerie, expensive pieces I'd never seen her wear at home. When I complimented her on a new perfume, she claimed it was a sample from work, but I'd never smelled it on her during our intimate moments. Her phone habits became even more secretive. She started taking it everywhere, even to the bathroom. One Saturday, Emily said she had to go to the bank for some urgent paperwork. It seemed odd for weekend work, but she insisted it was important. After she left, I decided to drive by the bank. It was completely empty, no cars in the parking lot, no lights on inside. I sat there for 2 hours. Emily never showed up. When she came home that evening, she talked about how exhausting the paperwork had been, how she'd had to organize files for Monday morning. The lies were becoming more elaborate, more detailed. It was as if she was enjoying the deception, getting better at it with each passing day. I started keeping a journal of her inconsistencies. Every lie, every excuse, every time she claimed to be one place but was somewhere else. The pattern became undeniable. Our marriage had become a performance, and I was the only one who didn't know I was acting. The breaking point came during our anniversary week. Emily had been especially affectionate, suggesting we plan a romantic getaway. She seemed genuinely excited about rekindling our romance. But that very same week, Carl informed me that she'd been at the hotel with Richard 3 times. I realized that Emily wasn't just cheating, she was compartmentalizing her life so effectively that she could be passionate with her lover and then come home and plan romantic moments with me. The psychological manipulation was staggering. I wasn't just being betrayed, I was being gaslight. That's when I discovered something that changed everything. While Emily was in the garden one evening, her laptop was open on the kitchen table. I shouldn't have looked, but something compelled me to. Her email was open and I saw messages that made my blood run cold. There were emails between Emily and Richard dating back 8 months. But these weren't just about secret meetings. They were planning a future together. Richard had written about leaving his wife Patricia once, the time was right. Emily responded about how much she looked forward to starting fresh with him. But the most devastating email was one where Emily wrote about me. She called me comfortable but boring, said that I'd let myself go, and that she felt trapped in a life that was suffocating her creativity and passion. She wrote that Richard made her feel alive again, in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Reading those words felt like being stabbed. This wasn't just physical infidelity, Emily had emotionally divorced me months ago. I was already a ghost in her life, she just hadn't told me yet. The emails revealed more disturbing details. They had been together in our house when I was at work. In our bed. They had laughed about my obliviousness, with Richard joking that mechanics aren't known for their detective skills. Emily had shared intimate details about our marriage, our problems, our private moments. I printed everything. Every email, every cruel comment, every plan they'd made behind my back. The evidence was overwhelming, but more than that, it showed me who Emily really was. Not the woman I'd married, not the mother I'd thought was devoted to our family, but someone capable of cold, calculated deception. But I also discovered something about Richard that Emily apparently didn't know. There were emails from other women in his contacts. Emily wasn't his first affair, and she probably wouldn't be his last. He was a serial cheater, and my wife was just his latest conquest. Armed with this knowledge, I had to make a choice. I could confront them both, destroy their fantasy bubble, and watch our family implode in a spectacular public mess. Or I could handle this more strategically. I chose strategy over emotion. First, I made copies of everything: photos, emails, documentation of their meetings. I stored these safely with my lawyer, a friend from high school named Marcus who specialized in family law. Marcus was shocked by the extent of the evidence but assured me it would make the divorce proceedings straightforward. Next, I started preparing financially. I opened a separate bank account and began transferring money gradually. I made sure our joint assets were protected and that Chloe's college fund remained untouchable. I wasn't going to let their selfishness destroy our daughter's future. The hardest part was continuing to live normally while planning my exit. Every morning I woke up next to Emily, knowing she was thinking about another man. Every kiss goodnight felt like poison. But I maintained the charade because I wanted to control how this ended. I also did something that surprised even me. I reached out to Patricia, Richard's wife. Not to tell her about the affair, but to feel out whether she suspected anything. What I discovered was that Patricia was already planning her own exit. She'd hired a private investigator months ago and had been building her own case against Richard. Patricia and I met at a coffee shop in the next town over. She was nothing like Emily had described, not the boring, neglected wife Richard had portrayed. Patricia was intelligent, successful in her own right, and had simply been waiting for the right moment to strike. We didn't become co-conspirators, but we shared a mutual understanding. We both knew our spouses were living lies and we both deserved better. Patricia planned to move back to Denver with her children after the divorce. She had family there and a job opportunity. This conversation gave me clarity. I wasn't the only victim here. Richard and Emily had convinced themselves they were star-crossed lovers trapped in loveless marriages, but the reality was they were just selfish people who'd rather deceive than be honest about their unhappiness. 3 weeks later, I executed my plan. On a Thursday evening, I prepared everything. I packed my essential belongings while Emily was at work, supposedly. I arranged for Chloe to spend the weekend with my mother-in-law, telling Emily I thought it would be good for them to have quality time together. Then I wrote my note. Not the short message I'd originally planned, but something more comprehensive. Emily, I know about Richard, the hotel, and the 8 months of lies. I've seen the emails where you call our marriage suffocating and plan your future with a married man. I know you've brought him into our home, our bed. I know you've shared our private moments with him for his entertainment. I'm not angry anymore, I'm grateful. You've shown me who you really are, and now I can make decisions based on truth instead of illusion. The papers will be filed Monday. Our lawyer has everything. Take care of yourself. I placed the note on her pillow and left. But I didn't go far. I checked into a hotel across town and waited. I wanted to see her reaction, to understand if there was any remorse, any recognition of the pain she'd caused. Emily's reaction was everything I'd expected and worse. She called me 97 times that first night. Her voicemails progressed from confusion to panic to anger to desperate pleading. She showed up at my mother's house at 2 a.m., demanding to know where I was. She called my work, my friends, even my sister in California. But not once in those initial hours did she express genuine remorse. Every message was about how I'd ambushed her, how I should have talked to her first, how we could work through this. There was no acknowledgement of the betrayal, no understanding of the depth of her deception. On Friday evening she finally reached me. Through her tears she admitted to making mistakes, but claimed she'd already ended things with Richard. She begged me to come home so we could fix this together. I asked her one question: when you wrote that email calling me boring and suffocating, did you mean it? Her silence was my answer. I told her I'd be home Sunday to pick up more of my things, and she should plan to stay elsewhere while I was there. She protested, but I hung up. That weekend, I learned more about the aftermath of my departure. Patricia had chosen the same weekend to confront Richard. Apparently, seeing my note had convinced her that the time for waiting was over. Richard came home Friday night to find his belongings on the front lawn and divorce papers on the kitchen table. The small-town gossip network was in overdrive. People I barely knew were calling to offer support or ask for details. I realized that Emily and Richard's affair hadn't been as secret as they'd thought. Several people had seen them together and had been wondering when one of us spouses would figure it out. Mrs. Henderson, who lived next door, admitted she'd seen Richard's BMW in our driveway multiple times when I was at work. She'd assumed he was there on bank business and hadn't wanted to interfere. Now she felt terrible about not saying anything. Tom Martinez, who worked at the hotel where they'd been meeting, said the staff all knew they were having an affair. They weren't exactly subtle about it, he told me. Always arriving and leaving separately, but then acting like newlyweds in the lobby. I realized that half the town had known about my wife's infidelity before I did. The humiliation was almost worse than the betrayal itself. When I went home on Sunday, Emily was there despite my request. She'd been crying, her eyes were red and puffy, her face blotchy. For a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She tried again to explain, to minimize what had happened. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she said. Richard made me feel special, appreciated. You've been working so much we barely talked anymore. I felt invisible in my own life. I let her talk. All the classic excuses of the unfaithful spouse. It was my fault for working too hard, her needs weren't being met, she felt unappreciated. Never mind that I'd been working extra hours to save for the family vacation she'd wanted, or that I'd supported her return to work, or that I'd spent years trying to be a good husband and father. You made a choice, Emily, I finally said. Every day for 8 months you made the choice to lie to me. You chose to bring him into our home. You chose to mock our marriage in emails. You chose to plan a future with a married man while pretending to plan one with me. Those weren't mistakes, they were decisions. She started crying harder. I know I hurt you, but we can get past this. People do it all the time. We can go to counseling, start over. I'll do whatever it takes. What about Richard? I asked. She looked confused. What about him? Are you in love with him? The question hung in the air. Emily opened her mouth, closed it, then looked away. I thought so, I said. You can't even deny it. It's complicated, she whispered. No, Emily. It's simple. You fell in love with someone else while married to me. That's not complicated, that's betrayal. I finished packing my things while she sat on our bed crying. As I was leaving, she grabbed my arm. What about Chloe? She asked. What am I supposed to tell her? Tell her the truth, I said. That sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love. That mommy and daddy can't live together anymore, but we'll both always love her. She'll hate me. Maybe. But that's a consequence of your choices, not mine. That was the last real conversation Emily and I had as husband and wife. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. With the evidence I'd gathered, Emily's lawyer advised her not to fight the terms. I got joint custody of Chloe, the house was sold with proceeds split equally, and I kept my business. Emily moved to Tulsa, claiming she needed a fresh start. Richard's divorce was messy. Patricia had been thorough in her preparations, and she took him for everything she could legally get. His reputation in town was destroyed, and he eventually had to move away to find work. The aftermath was hard on everyone, especially Chloe. She was angry with both of us for disrupting her world. She sprawled across 2 states, staying with friends and family. She blamed me for destroying her life, but she also seemed lost without Emily's daily presence. Over the months, I learned more about the collateral damage. Richard and Emily did try to make a go of it after their divorces were finalized. They moved in together in Tulsa, thinking they'd finally gotten their fairy tale ending. But reality hit hard. Without the excitement of secrecy, their relationship lost its spark. Richard was paying heavy alimony and child support to Patricia. Emily struggled to find decent work in a new city. They were both starting over in their 40s with limited resources and a lot of baggage. Chloe refused to visit Emily while she was living with Richard. He ruined our family, she told me during one of our weekend visits. Why would I want to meet him? This created even more tension between Emily and Richard. He wanted to be part of Emily's parenting, but Chloe wanted nothing to do with him. Within 6 months they'd broken up. Emily claimed Richard was not the man she thought he was, and that he'd become controlling and bitter. Richard, from what I heard through mutual acquaintances, said Emily was high maintenance and had unrealistic expectations. The truth was probably simpler. They'd based their relationship on fantasy and deception. When they had to build something real together, they discovered they barely knew each other. Emily ended up moving back to our hometown, renting a small apartment across town. She got a job at the insurance company, as I mentioned, making much less money than she had at the bank. Richard moved to Texas, closer to his children, and took a significant pay cut at a smaller bank. The irony wasn't lost on me. They destroyed 2 families and their own reputations for a relationship that couldn't survive 6 months of reality. Chloe started doing better once Emily was living alone again. She began spending alternate weekends with her mother, though their relationship remained strained. Emily had to work hard to rebuild trust with our daughter, and it was a slow process. As for me, I threw myself into building my new life. I moved to a town about 2 hours away, bought a small garage, and started over. The first year was hard financially and emotionally, but gradually things improved. I started dating again about a year after the divorce. Nothing serious at first, just coffee dates and casual dinners. It was strange learning to trust again, to open up to someone new. I found myself hypervigilant about red flags, analyzing every inconsistency in women's stories. My therapist, yes, I finally started seeing one, helped me understand that I was carrying trauma from the betrayal. She explained that discovering infidelity often creates symptoms similar to PTSD, hypervigilance, trust issues, anxiety, and intrusive thoughts. Your world was shattered, Dr. Rodriguez told me during one session. Your fundamental understanding of reality was proved false. That kind of betrayal changes your brain chemistry. It's going to take time to heal. She was right. Some nights I'd wake up in a cold sweat, reliving the moment I discovered Emily's emails. Other times I'd find myself obsessively checking up on new girlfriends, looking for signs of deception that weren't there. But slowly I started to heal. I joined a support group for betrayed spouses, where I met others who understood what I'd been through. Hearing their stories helped me realize I wasn't alone or crazy. Many of them had experienced similar gaslighting, similar elaborate deceptions. One man, Robert, had discovered his wife's affair through a birthday party invitation. She told him she was working late, but their daughter received an invitation to a pool party at Uncle Kevin's house, a man Robert had never heard of. When he investigated, he found his wife had been living a double life for 3 years, complete with a fake boyfriend she'd introduced to their children. Another woman, Sandra, found out about her husband's infidelity when his mistress showed up at their daughter's graduation. The other woman thought the husband was divorced and had been planning to surprise him. Instead, she discovered she was the other woman in a very messy situation. These stories helped me understand that Emily's level of deception, while devastating to me, wasn't unusual. Cheating spouses often become incredibly skilled at compartmentalization and manipulation. They create elaborate lies and somehow convince themselves they're justified. About 18 months after the divorce, I met Lisa at a classic car show. She was admiring a 1967 Mustang I'd restored, and we struck up a conversation about engines. She was a high school history teacher, divorced with no children, and refreshingly straightforward. Our first date was fixing a problem with her car, hardly romantic, but it felt natural. She didn't play games, didn't have mysterious phone calls or unexplained absences. When she said she'd be somewhere, she was there. When she made plans, she kept them. I appreciate honesty, she told me on our third date. My ex-husband was a compulsive liar, nothing as dramatic as an affair, but he lied about everything. Money, work, friends. I spent years feeling crazy because nothing he said matched reality. We took things slowly. Neither of us was in a hurry to remarry or merge lives. We both had been burned and needed time to build trust gradually. But over months, then years, we developed something solid. Lisa met Chloe about 6 months into our relationship. I was nervous. My daughter was still angry about the divorce and suspicious of any woman in my life. But Lisa didn't try to be her friend or mother. She just treated Chloe with respect and let the relationship develop naturally. She seems nice, Dad, Chloe told me after their second meeting. And she doesn't try too hard, which is good. Mom's new boyfriend is always trying to be my friend. It's weird. Yes, Emily had started dating again too. A divorced father of 2 who seemed nice enough but was clearly trying to win over Chloe with gifts and forced fun activities. Chloe saw right through it and found it annoying. I just want people to be normal, she told me once. Why does everything have to be so complicated with adults? She had a point. After all the drama of the divorce and its aftermath, normal felt like a luxury. 3 years post-divorce, life had found a new rhythm. Chloe was thriving in high school, making good grades and playing volleyball. She'd learned to navigate having divorced parents and seemed more mature for the experience, though I wished she hadn't had to grow up so quickly. Emily and I had developed a cordial co-parenting relationship. We communicated about Chloe's needs, attended her school events separately, and kept our interactions brief and businesslike. The anger had faded into indifference, which felt healthier for everyone. I heard through Chloe that Emily had broken up with the divorced father and was dating someone new, a teacher at a different school. Emily seemed to have learned something from her experience with Richard because she was taking this relationship much slower and hadn't introduced him to Chloe yet. Mom says she's learned to be more careful about who she trusts, Chloe reported one weekend. The irony of Emily talking about trust issues wasn't lost on me, but I didn't comment. Chloe didn't need to hear my opinions about her mother's newfound wisdom. As for Richard, I heard he'd remarried, a younger woman with no children who didn't mind his complicated past. They moved to a different state for a fresh start. Patricia had done well for herself too, remarrying a doctor in Denver and seeming genuinely happy in the photos Chloe showed me from social media. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd handled things differently. What if I'd confronted Emily directly instead of planning my exit? What if I'd tried marriage counseling? What if I'd been a better husband somehow? But Dr. Rodriguez helped me understand that these what-if questions were pointless and potentially harmful. You can't take responsibility for someone else's choices, she reminded me. Emily chose to have an affair. She chose to lie to you for months. She chose to plan a future with another man while married to you. Those were her decisions, not yours. She was right. I'd been a faithful husband for 15 years. Not perfect, I worked long hours, sometimes forgot anniversaries, occasionally left dishes in the sink. But I'd never cheated, never lied about my whereabouts, never betrayed Emily's trust in such a fundamental way. The betrayal had taught me valuable lessons about myself and relationships. I'd learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive having my world turned upside down. I'd learned to trust my instincts and not dismiss red flags. Most importantly, I'd learned that I deserved better than a relationship built on lies. Lisa and I had been together for over 2 years when she brought up the subject of moving in together. We were both ready for the next step, but we wanted to do it right. We found a house that was new to both of us. No ghosts from previous relationships. Are you sure about this? I asked her the night before we signed the lease. You know my history. You know I have trust issues. Jake, she said, taking my hands, your trust issues aren't a character flaw. They're a reasonable response to betrayal. The fact that you're willing to try again to build something new with me shows how strong you are. Moving in together felt different from when I'd married Emily. I was older, more aware of what I was committing to, more intentional about building a healthy relationship. Lisa and I talked about everything: finances, household responsibilities, boundaries with ex-partners, plans for the future. Chloe was supportive of the move. At 16, she was focused on her own life and plans for college. She liked Lisa and was happy to see me happy. You smile more now, Dad, she told me. You're more like how you used to be before everything got weird. That observation hit me hard. I hadn't realized how much Emily's betrayal had changed me, how much of myself I'd lost in those final months of our marriage. Lisa had helped me find my way back to who I was, or maybe who I'd grown into after surviving such a profound loss. The 4th anniversary of my discovery of Emily's affair passed quietly. I marked it privately, acknowledging how much my life had changed since that devastating day. What had started as the worst day of my life had ultimately led to freedom, growth, and genuine happiness. I thought about Emily sometimes, wondered if she ever reflected on the choices that had blown up both our lives. Did she regret the affair? Did she miss what we'd had before Richard? Did she understand the depth of the pain she'd caused? I'd probably never know. And I'd learned that I didn't need to know. Her thoughts and feelings about our past were no longer my concern. My focus was on the future I was building with Lisa and the relationship I was maintaining with Chloe. 5 years after the divorce, Chloe graduated high school with honors. Both Emily and I attended the ceremony, sitting on opposite sides of the auditorium with our respective partners. Watching our daughter walk across that stage, I felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in her accomplishments, sadness about the family we'd once been, and gratitude for the family we'd become in different forms. At the graduation party afterward, Emily approached me. Jake, she said quietly, I want you to know that I'm sorry for everything. I know I hurt you and Chloe, and I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it. I looked at her for a long moment. She looked older, tired in a way that went beyond physical fatigue. I appreciate that, Emily, I said finally. We all made it through. You've done well, she said, glancing over at Lisa, who was talking with some of Chloe's friends. She seems like a good person. She is. Chloe's happy. That's what matters most. Yes, it is. We stood there for a moment in awkward silence, two people who'd once planned to grow old together and now were essentially strangers. I should go, Emily said. But I'm glad we could both be here for her. Me too. That was the most substantial conversation Emily and I had had since the divorce. It felt like closure, though I hadn't realized I needed it. Chloe left for college that fall, choosing a school 6 hours away where she could start fresh without the baggage of our small-town drama. She was studying business with plans to eventually take over my garage, a possibility that filled me with pride and excitement. I want to modernize it, she told me during one of our video calls. Maybe add some electric vehicle services, get into the sustainable automotive industry. But I want to keep the personal touch, the community connection that you've built. Hearing her talk about the future with such enthusiasm reminded me why I'd fought so hard to protect her world during the divorce. She'd weathered the storm and emerged strong, focused, and optimistic about life. Lisa and I got engaged on the 6th anniversary of my divorce, a date I chose deliberately. What had once marked the end of one chapter was now celebrating the beginning of another. We planned a small wedding with just close family and friends. Chloe was my maid of honor, or best daughter, as she preferred to be called. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said in her speech at the reception. "You taught me that when life knocks you down, you get back up. You showed me what integrity looks like even when it's hard. And you proved that real love is possible, even after heartbreak." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Now, 7 years later, I can honestly say that Emily's betrayal was one of the worst and best things that ever happened to me. It destroyed the life I thought I wanted but led me to the life I actually needed. I learned that I'm stronger than I believed, that I can survive devastating loss and build something beautiful from the ruins. I learned to trust my instincts, to value honesty above comfort, and to never settle for less than genuine love and respect. Most importantly, I learned that betrayal doesn't define you, how you respond to it does. Emily taught me what I don't want in a relationship. Lisa showed me what I do want. The contrast between deception and honesty, between selfish love and selfless love, between a relationship built on fantasy and one built on reality, couldn't be starker. Sometimes people ask me if I ever think about what might have been if Emily hadn't cheated. The truth is, I don't. That life was built on a foundation of lies, and it would have crumbled eventually. Better that it happened when Chloe was young enough to adapt than when she was older and the damage would have been even greater. I'm grateful now for Emily's betrayal because it led me to Lisa. I'm grateful for the pain because it taught me resilience. I'm grateful for the lies because they made me value truth. And I'm grateful that I chose to leave with dignity rather than stay and accept less than I deserved. That decision changed everything. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel, so subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.